One of the easiest ways to ruin a guitar upgrade is with a bad solder joint. Getting it wrong could mean a loose connection, unwanted buzz, or even your signal cutting out mid-song. This makes the whole process of upgrading your guitar kind of obsolete in the first place. So, today we will walk you through it step by step, give you some tips and tricks and an overview of tools that you need to get on your way to upgrading guitars in no time. Hey guys, my name is Steven from Nebula Guitar Parts, where we make pickup building less mysterious, more accessible and easier to understand. Today we will be looking at the three most common solder joints in guitar electronics: a lug to casing, a wire to lug and a wire to casing. Before we get into the actual tutorial, these are the tools that I will be using today and what I have been using on a regular. So first of all, we have a silicone mat. It's heat resistant. It's just a generic black mat to protect your work surface and to keep it safe. Then we have a fume extractor. You do really need a clean and safe work environment, and this one does just that. It has a activated carbon filter in the front and it just removes all those toxic fumes. You're using the lead-free solder, but still there are still harmful chemicals in there, so you will want to remove as much fumes as possible. Then the actual soldering station. Here we have my personal Weller WE1010. It's part of the educational kit. It's my personal one. I've been using it for well over a decade and it's great. It works really well. It's really reliable, really consistent. It comes with a base with a sponge. Yeah, you definitely need to clean off your tips in between the solder joints. And then this is lead-free solder. You have to watch out with the region that you're from. In Europe, for example, or the biggest part of Europe, it's prohibited to use, and it's even completely prohibited in commercial use. So you will always want to use lead-free solder because those resin core ones are prohibited for commercial use. They're more difficult to work with. They take some getting used to, but if you want to sell your pickups in Europe commercially, sadly you have no choice. And we will talk about it in the actual tutorial, how to best use it. Then we have a desoldering pump. The desoldering pump is always nice to have if you make any mistakes. It's really easy to get rid of it and to re-solder your joint afterwards. A needle file. Most guitar components like pots have a protective coating on the back, so you'll want to scratch that off and that makes the joints that much easier to stick to. A tweezer. Always nice to reach in those tough spaces and to hold wires and delicate components while they are hot and soldering. A flush cutter, self-explanatory. You will want to cut wires to size and also easy to bend lugs where you need them to be. And then a helping hand. This one is one with a magnifying glass and some alligator clips. There are multiple versions of this. And this is the one that we sell and the one that I like, and it's a really nice little tool to have. One last thing before we can start with the actual tutorial is important note on solder types. When you look at older tutorials about soldering and solder types, you might often see resin core or lead solders. Now, in most parts of Europe, if not of all of Europe, these are actually prohibited as of last year. So you're not allowed to use these, especially not in a commercial context. What is readily available right now is the lead-free variants. Now these are more challenging to solder. These require a higher heat, so you might need a higher output soldering iron. But most important of all, they actually dry or solidify with a matte finish. Whereas the resin core ones dried with a shiny finish, you knew right away if you had a cold solder or not, if it dried up shiny or matte. But with these lead-free ones, they always have a matte finish to them. So it's more difficult to know if you have a cold solder or if a joint is properly soldered. So it might require a little bit more of a trial and error. So here we have the potentiometer in the third hand. These potentiometers have a protective layer on their casing, and that one needs to be filed off in order to have a better adhesion with the solder. So I'm just going to take it off here just for some easier handling. And I'll be using a small needle file to scrape off that protective layer. So the lug is going to meet the casing here, so I will just be scraping it off there. So there we go. You can see with the difference in lightning. So the next step is to actually bend the first lug that we're gonna solder here, bend it against it. So it helps if you put a little bend in it there and get it as close as possible to it. There we go. Then we are going to put it in our helping hand again and angle it in the correct way. Now, since I'm using the Weller WE1010 for this, I have it set up to 400 degrees Celsius. Just pre-tinning my tip here. There we go. Going to rotate it a bit. And then we are going to apply the heat. Let it heat up. And then we're going to feed the solder right into it. Then we'll keep heating it up and feeding in a little solder at a time until we see the solder from the lug flow onto the casing. There we go. I'll angle it better for you. Here we have it. That lug is now completely soldered to the casing. Always remember to clean off your tip after every joint and to reapply the solder. Let me make sure that you can see it out from all sides. Now our second solder joint will be a straightforward wire to lug. And for that, as an example, I will be using these small little pigtail wires that are pre-cut and pre-stripped. So we can just pull off the insulation and it's ready for use. Now, what we will first do is we will apply solder on the lug. So I will angle it this way. And we will heat up and apply heat to that first lug. And then we gently apply some solder. Until that's covered. Then we take our wire. I'm using pliers to hold it. And then we will heat the back of the lug so that it remelts, and then we will pass our wire through. Now it's important to hold this as still as possible because while the solder is cooling down, if you move the wire or the component that you're soldering too much, then that can actually cause a cold solder. Remember to always clean your tip and reapply solder after every joint. Now, what you can do after it's completely hardened is you can give it a little gentle tug, and here we see that it's completely attached and that there are no issues with that. To be completely sure that the joint is successful, the best thing to do is actually take out a multimeter and to check for continuity. So you would check the base of the potentiometer here and the extremity of the wire. And if that has continuity, you have successfully checked that part of the circuit. And if there is continuity, you can be assured that the joint is correct and it's not a cold joint. Now for the last joint of this tutorial, we will be doing a wire to casing, which would be common for the ground wire, for example. So again, the casing still has that same protective coating. So we will scratch off the protective coating where we will be doing the solder joint. Watch out for that casing because it could still be hot from that first solder joint. Now for the wire to casing, some people like to do it different. Some people like to put a solder joint somewhere in the middle of the casing. Others like to do it on the side, on the rim, and others like to do it on the side completely. This has no influence on the quality or on the tone or anything. It's just personal preference and wire layout. If you are working on a complicated wiring harness that requires a lot of casing joints, then planning these out strategically will help you later on with that harness. So for this tutorial, we will go for what is, in my opinion, the easiest, and that is here on the corner joint of the casing. So again, we will scrape off the protective layer. As you can see, it's scraped off, and we'll put it back in our third hand. Now, what I first like to do is apply some solder to the casing. Just heat it up and introduce some solder. There we have a nice little blob. For this example, we will be using the same quill pigtail type wire that we were using before. Now, for these type of connections, I also like to apply some solder to the actual wire as well, since it's a bit of an awkward joint, makes it easier. So I will be using the other alligator clip here to just hold that wire in position so that I can apply some solder to it. Not much, just a little bit to make it easier on ourselves later. As you can see, a piece of solder just fell off, and that is why it's always important to protect your work surface with a silicone mat like this. Now we can take the wire out. Do watch out, because you just soldered this, so it could be a little hot. Let me reposition this again. There we go. I will be holding it with my tweezers, because while soldering, it could also become quite hot. Now there are multiple ways to do this, but when you're making an actual wiring harness, you don't always have the option to clamp it anywhere, because the easiest in this case would be to use the second alligator clip to hold the wire while I solder it to the casing. But in many cases, when doing a wiring harness, you don't have that luxury. So that is why I pre-soldered the wire and the casing, just to make it easier. Since we only have two hands and one hand is holding the wire and the other the soldering iron, we don't have a third hand to feed in the solder at the same time. So we liquefy the joint on the casing, and then we introduce the wire. And as you can see, that's perfectly encapsulated, and the solder joint has a nice little shine to it. Again, if we would want to know if the solder joint is complete and without faults, we would check for continuity between the casing and the extremity of the wire, or wherever that connection is going in your wiring harness, and that way you would know for sure if the connection was successful or not. So here we have it, a potentiometer with the first lug soldered to the case, a wire soldered to the other lug, and a wire soldered to the casing of the pot. Now, for example, you made a mistake. You would want to remove one of these wires, or a solder connection in general. You would use one of these. This is a desoldering pump, and the way it actually works is you have a plunger and a button, and you just push in the plunger till it clicks, and when you are above your joint that you want to remove and you have it heated up, you push the button and it launches the plunger backwards and creates suction at the tip. So I'll show you how that works. So you would heat your joint and then put that against it and suck away the solder, and that way the wire is loose, and then you can reheat it and do it again to remove all the leftover solder. Might need to do it a couple of times depending on how stubborn the solder is. So we just gave it another try, and as you can see, this removed the solder almost completely. So that way you can just reuse all the parts, and or if you made a mistake, just start anew. And that's how you solder a guitar potentiometer, from lugs to wire to the casing itself. You will put the links to all the kits in the description below if you're interested. And if you found this tutorial helpful, hit that like button and subscribe for more on pickup building and guitar electronics. We recently released a tutorial on wax bonding, so if you're interested, you can click on the link on the screen. Got questions or want me to cover anything specific? Drop it in the comments, I'd love to hear from you. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.